We have referred to it as a specimen merely because of its place, and not because of any great superiority, either in matter or in manner. It possesses over a number of other articles, except that it is somewhat more complete as a biography. Our whole book throughout abounds with scenes and adventures equally romantic, and many of them are described as artlessly and as well. Indeed, what almost everyone knows generally of the kind of life led by the first settlers in the middle and some parts of the western states will serve to convince him that our compilation must be a work of no little interest. Almost everyone knows something, yet how indefinite is his knowledge of the early history of this now flourishing part of the country? 756, he may have some general notion of brave men starting out with their families from homes of security and settling in little groups in the wilderness, erecting their log cabins in their clearings, and a rude stockade fort near the center of each of these little colonies, to which at the alarm of an invasion, their wives and children were seen hastily flying, of the whole of one of. These little settlements assembled at times of extraordinary danger, and going from farm to farm to plow their fields, or to cut down their harvest, their rifles all the time at their sides, or ready to be seized at a moment's warning, of savages lurking in the woods, shooting down whoever ventured to go forth, unarmed and alone to his labor, then rushing into the undefended door to kill or carry into captivity all the inmates of his dwelling, of desperate conflicts between the white settlers and their savage foes, sometimes one party victorious and sometimes the other, of fugitive Indians pursued into the heart of the wilderness, and the captives they had carried off, perhaps the wives, children, brothers, or sisters of the pursuers rescued, of other prisoners when pursuit was either unsuccessful or not made, sometimes making their escape by the way, then chased by their disappointed captors, and if not again taken, wandering days and nights in the forest without food or the means of procuring it, and at length reaching their homes, perhaps only to find them desolate, sometimes less fortunate, bound to the stake, and expiring in tortures, and sometimes carried to the Indian villages, adopted into their families, and becoming learned in their language and traditions, their manners and customs, modes of life and of warfare. And then perhaps after long years of captivity, returning to their friends and describing all the wonders they had witnessed during a sojourn among a strange and uncivilized people. 947, but beyond these vague generalities, how few know anything of the life these settlers led. Yet who that knows aught of that life does not long to know more? Who that has heard of such incidents as we have now just enumerated does not feel a longing desire to hear them described at length with all their attending circumstances? To gratify such a feeling as this was one object of our compilation. Whether we have succeeded to the satisfaction of our readers, it is for them to determine. But for our own part, we repeat, we would not know where to seek, whether in the pages of fiction or of history, a relation of events more romantic, or possessing a more absorbing interest than any of the narratives we have given to the public. But it is not merely as a collection of entertaining and wonderful adventure, to be read for a winter's evening amusement, and then to be thrown aside as a thing of little worth. Our volume recommends it itself to the American reader. It is still more valuable as a faithful chronicle of the times of which it relates. 1045, decidedly, the most interesting portions in the history of any part of our country are those relating first to the period of its early settlements, and secondly to that period commencing with the French Indian War and terminating with the struggle of the Revolution. But it so happens that in the greater part of the region of country, whose early condition this work is intended to illustrate, these two periods exactly coincide. Partly for this reason, and partly for others, we shall presently mention, do we deem that very region of the country the scene of more varied and stirring adventure than has been witnessed in almost any other section of the land? The incidents of a frontier settlement and the incidents of one or the other of the wars referred to, all taking place at the same time. 1129, and the character of the aboriginal tribes who disputed with the settlers of this region the occupancy of the lands, and in the features of the country where their contests were had, may be found other causes both to multiply the adventures and to render them remarkable beyond those of any of our other tier settlements. The Indians who here resisted the advance of civilization were certainly the most heroic and warlike race that ever claimed a portion of the territory we now call our own, and they kept up a more prolonged border warfare than was elsewhere witnessed in defense of it. During a great part of this protracted warfare, the white settlements were on the eastern side of the mountains, and the Indian villages on the western. 1211, the mountainous district between, while it served as a barrier to the tide of civilization, afforded secure hiding places the small war parties of the Indians, whence they could wait a favorable opportunity and make an unexpected descent upon the settlements, and then again sheltering them in the fastnesses of the hills, until at their leisure they could make good their retreat. And when the intrepid pioneers at length ventured across the mountains and established themselves in the western valley, they were so few in number, and removed so far beyond the reach of any assistance their countrymen might have rendered them, that they were enabled to maintain themselves in their new against the formidable attacks of their more numerous adversaries, only by engaging in the most desperate conflicts. During such a period, and in such a condition of the frontiers, more remarkable scenes must have been enacted every year than have been witnessed within the same extent of country in any half a century since. But for many reasons it is of this period that we know the least. 1310, the adventurers had too much to do than to write their own history. Indeed, most of them knew far better how to wield the axe or the rifle than the pen. And even of those who lived to enjoy in the evening of their days the quietness of a safe and peaceful home, and who were skilled enough to record the various adventures of which they had been witnesses, or had borne a part, few, it is evident, thought the occurrences of their eventful lives worth the trouble of narrating. Such incidents as to us would appear strange, were to them of everyday occurrence, and perhaps they thought as little of them in many instances as the men of our own day do of the ordinary events of theirs. We suspect, however, that of the few memorials of the times that have been in print, some have been lost. They may have fallen into the hands of those whose bad taste would lead them to despise the homeliness of the style in which they were written, and to cast them aside among the rubbish of forgotten things. 1405, this we know, that it was with great difficulty we were enabled to procure a number of the most interesting narratives in our volume. The copies of them to be found must be extremely scarce. What few remain of these, but at the same time valuable and highly entertaining productions, it is one main object of our publication to preserve. It is a duty which we of the present generation owe to the memory of the pioneers of civilization, in the region where we dwell, to gather up with religious care whatever records of the times there are left, and studying them well, to transmit them in as enduring a form as possible to the generations that succeed. Us, we, the children of these hardy adventurers, and the posterity that comes after us, should know how much we are indebted to them, in order to appreciate as we ought the blessings we enjoy, purchased and secured to us at such an expense of peril, suffering, and toil. How different from ours is the life they led. Exploring the realities of the early American frontier, a look into incidents of border life. Welcome to another special episode, where we continue our exploration of one of the most compelling historical narratives of early America. Today, we're diving deeper into Joseph Prits's 1838 work, Incidents of Border Life. This episode builds on our ongoing series, focusing on the raw and rugged experiences of settlers on the American frontier. As we move through this account, we aim to provide not just an entertaining story, but a clearer understanding of the complex, perilous, and often romanticized world of early American pioneers. In this episode, we'll revisit Prits's reflections, where he describes one particular story as a specimen of the time, not because it is necessarily superior in content or storytelling, but because it offers a more complete look at the life of the subject. Prits asserts that throughout his book, there are numerous scenes and adventures that are equally romantic and vividly described. His narrative is not just an entertaining read. It's a rich, detailed chronicle of the brave men and women who settled the middle and western states of America. Many of us have a general notion of what life was like for the early settlers, brave families leaving the security of their homes to establish new lives in the wilderness. We imagine them building log cabins, erecting rudimentary stockade forts, and forming small, tight-knit communities to defend against sudden attacks. At the slightest alarm, women and children would run to the fort's protection, and entire settlements would gather during times of heightened danger. Fields were plowed and harvests gathered with rifles at the ready, while men stood guard against surprise attacks from the woods. Prits vividly recounts stories of Native American warriors lurking in the surrounding forests, striking swiftly against settlers who ventured out alone. These raids were marked by chaos and tragedy, as settlers were either killed or taken captive. There were tales of fierce battles, some won by the settlers, others by the tribes. Sometimes pursuers would venture deep into the wilderness to rescue captives who might be family members. In cases where rescue efforts failed, captives often found themselves wandering through the forests, hungry and disoriented, as they tried to escape back to the settlements. Some were more fortunate and eventually found their way home. Others faced harsher fates, enduring captivity or torture at the hands of their captors. Still, the reality was not always bleak. Some captives, particularly those who survived for years in captivity, were adopted into native tribes, learning their customs, language, and traditions. After long years of adaptation, these individuals sometimes found their way back to their original communities, bringing with them tales of the culture and lifestyle of the indigenous people they had lived among. These stories provide an unparalleled look at a side of history, often lost in broader narratives, a glimpse into the humanity on both sides of the frontier conflicts. However, as Prits notes, most people today only have a vague understanding of this chapter of American history. The early settlers' daily lives, marked by constant vigilance and hardship, are often reduced to generalities. Yet, there's a strong desire among readers to know more details that can bring these stories to life and offer a more complete picture. It was this curiosity that drove Prits to compile incidents of border life. His aim was not only to entertain, but also to illuminate the experiences of those who settled the American frontier. Prits believed that the history of the early American settlements, beginning with the French and Indian War and continuing through the Revolutionary War, is one of the most intriguing chapters in the nation's history. Interestingly, for the region Prits writes about, these two historical periods overlap. The stories he shares cover a time when the battles for territory and survival took place simultaneously. The indigenous tribes in these areas were among the most warlike and determined, engaging in prolonged conflicts as they sought to protect their lands. Their prolonged resistance resulted in some of the most remarkable stories of border warfare in American history. For much of this period, the white settlements were located east of the Appalachian Mountains, while Native American villages were to the west. The mountains, serving as both a physical and symbolic barrier, provided strategic hiding spots for small war parties, allowing them to launch surprise attacks on settlements. The rugged terrain also offered shelter during retreats, as the warriors slipped back into the cover of the hills. It wasn't until settlers finally ventured across the mountains into the western valleys that the dynamic began to change. However, these pioneers were isolated, cut off from reinforcements, and had to rely on their own skills and determination to defend their new homes. Prits emphasizes that the stories from this period are more numerous and dramatic than those of any other era in American frontier history. It was an era of extraordinary events that shaped the region's development in a way that no other period has since matched. Unfortunately, it is also one of the least documented eras. The settlers, preoccupied with survival, had little time to write down their experiences. Most of them were more adept with an axe or a rifle than with a pen. Even those who lived long enough to enjoy a peaceful retirement often didn't bother to record their adventures, likely considering them ordinary compared to the challenges they had faced. The few written accounts that did survive were often overlooked or lost over time. Some may have fallen into the hands of readers who dismissed the plain language of these narratives, leading to their neglect. Despite these challenges, Prits managed to gather a number of these rare stories for his book, which he considered both valuable and highly entertaining. His goal was to preserve these accounts as a tribute to the pioneers who shaped early American history. Prits saw his work as a duty to the memory of the settlers who braved the wilderness. He believed that it was essential for later generations to understand the struggles and sacrifices that laid the foundations for modern American society. He urged readers to study these records carefully, recognizing the debt owed to the pioneers for the peace and prosperity that later generations would enjoy. The differences between the lives of early settlers and our own are striking. They faced constant threats, limited resources, and the uncertainty of the unknown. Yet, despite these challenges, they managed to build settlements, establish trade, and lay the groundwork for what would become a flourishing nation. Pritz's book is not merely a collection of adventure tales to be read and forgotten. It is a vital record of a critical chapter in American history. As we continue our exploration of incidents of border life, we hope to bring you more stories of bravery, endurance, and the complex realities of the early American frontier. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into this remarkable period, uncovering the human stories that define it. Join us as we seek to understand and appreciate the efforts of those who ventured into the wilderness to create a new nation. Preserving the Frontier, a journey into incidents of border life. Welcome back to another episode where we continue to explore the extraordinary tales of early American pioneers, as chronicled in Joseph Pritz's Incidents of Border Life, published in 1838. Today, we're delving into the unique nature of frontier life and the importance of preserving these tales, as seen through the eyes of those who lived it. Pritz reflects on a pressing question: where other than in these fragments of history that we've managed to snatch from oblivion, can we gain an accurate understanding of that era? He emphasizes the dangers of comparing the past with present conditions, as it leads to misconceptions. Life on the frontier was a world apart from anything familiar today. The challenges faced by the early settlers were entirely different from those encountered by modern-day frontier adventurers. Pritz draws a vivid comparison. The pioneers of his time cleared dense forests with axes to create fields, while settlers of today's open prairies find land already suitable for farming. Pritz acknowledges that he could have attempted a broader, more connected narrative of the era, possibly outlining the history of frontier events with a general description of border life and character. However, such attempts have often fallen short, failing to capture the vividness and urgency of the times. As he notes, they frequently mislead, offering only a blue instead. Pritz chose to present the stories of the frontier in the same way he found them, as separate incidents, told in the words of the original adventurers or their contemporaries. His decision to maintain the authentic language, despite its rawness, is deliberate. He believed that altering the narratives would weaken their power and authenticity. To have attempted to improve the pictures they have drawn would only have destroyed their identity, Pritz states. He emphasizes that the stories, as told by those who live them, are perfect representations of border life, capturing the true spirit of the times. The tales are painted with enduring colors by the rude but faithful artists of the past, those untutored yet skillful witnesses who recorded events with a rough but sincere accuracy. Each story, though simple, conveys the harshness and bravery of frontier existence, offering insights into a time when survival was uncertain and every day was marked by both danger and discovery. As we wrap up this episode, it's important to remember why we continue to revisit these dramatic episodes of border life. In Pritz's words, we owe it to the memory of the pioneers of civilization to gather with religious care what fragments remain of the history of this time period and to transmit them to future generations in as enduring a form as possible. The mission of this channel aligns closely with this sentiment. While reading books might be less popular today than it once was, YouTube provides a platform to breathe new life into these fascinating stories buried in old books. If you appreciate this effort to revive forgotten history, consider supporting this channel by joining our Patreon page or becoming a YouTube member. For just $5 a month, you'll gain access to exclusive videos and be recognized at the end of each episode. Your support helps us continue this journey, sharing more stories from the past that deserve to be remembered.